All right, On Balance starts right now, and we welcome you to the fairest show on television. First tonight, it is not the economy. It's not the border. It's not crime. Something else is happening in this presidential election. Our job is to try to explain to you what that is. And it's difficult because it's happening in real time. Things are changing. In 2016, former President Donald Trump captured an undercurrent of voter emotion. It was something people didn't even understand until after the election. In 2024, Harris is capturing the same kind of energy. In politics, amateurs talk about the horse race, the national head-to-head polling, who's up, who's down. Nerds, of which I am proudly a member of that group, talk about the crosstabs of polls and questions gauging enthusiasm. The latest Monmouth poll shows Republican enthusiasm steady at 71% over the past few months. That makes a lot of sense. It's baked in, Donald Trump. Since Biden has dropped out, Democratic enthusiasm is up from 46% to 85%. That is enormous. Huge move. This is the more important number, though. Independents are up from 34% to 53%. The number for Democrats, of course, makes sense. The independent number is killing Donald Trump's chances. These are voters on the economy, on the border, and on crime. So yes, the media carries water for Kamala Harris. Yes, Harris ripped off Trump's no taxes on tips proposal. Okay, it's politics. And yes, Harris is trying to walk away from a radically progressive run for president in 2019, when, among other things, she wanted to ban health insurance, confiscate guns, and ban fracking. Apparently, none of that, or her policies about open borders, or her policies about defund the police, matters to independent voters. Our job is to try to figure out why these things that they told us were so important now don't matter. Nikki Haley explained it last night.
What they like about Kamala is that she's being hopeful. She's talking about freedom. She's talking about a way forward. They don't want a former president talking about the past.
They don't want someone talking about the past. Elections are about the future. Interestingly enough, Kamala Harris's team reposted that clip on their social media. Bill Clinton, guy who understood that elections are about the future, he famously had a sign in their campaign headquarters that said, "It's the economy, stupid." That was in 1992. The economy felt a lot like it does now. But more importantly than talking about the economy, Bill Clinton felt people's pain. He connected with voters where they were at. That's what voters want today. They want someone to feel their pain over the past 8 years. Today in North Carolina, Donald Trump tried.
By repealing the Biden-Harris regulatory onslaught, we can save an estimated $20,000. And you're talking about a tremendous amount, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year just in savings.
So now Trump is back talking about the issues today. He's trying to talk to middle-class voters about their pain of the Biden-Harris economy. They want to be able to talk about that, but he can't connect right now with their emotional needs. Kamala Harris is now promising something new, and Donald Trump is figuring out how to shake the past. We start tonight with Chris Cillizza, journalist, senior advisor of the DGA Group. Hey, welcome in.
Hey, my friend.
Good to see you. Thank you. Is there a chance that we don't really understand, and I mean collectively we, in all of our intellectual greatness in Washington, understand what's going on?
Yes, always a chance of that. I mean, I think you have to, okay, start here. The way that we usually figure these things out is to say, okay, well, in the past, when this happened, then the result was this, right? We haven't had a sitting president of the United States not run for a second term since 1964, Lyndon Johnson, and we certainly haven't had one step out in July of the election year. So we're through the looking glass a little bit here, and I think we all need to be mindful of that. Look, I still remember 2016, everyone asked me, who's going to win? And I said, Hillary Clinton's going to win. Polling, message, money, and Donald Trump won. That's why politics is
Did you learn from that event?
Well, this is what I'm saying. I certainly hope so. This is why politics is both interesting and unpredictable, and why I think we have to be mindful of saying, okay, this is what we're seeing today. This is what we think it might mean, but we don't have a monopoly on what it does mean.
Right. Politics, though, from a political standpoint, from a politician standpoint, is about giving your customers, the voters, what they want.
Yes.
What is Kamala Harris giving voters that they want?
Okay. I think in the near term, when we say voters, I think what we're really talking about, at least right now, is the Democratic base. Because I think the truth of the matter was, for 18 months, Democratic politicians, Joe Biden in particular, were giving voters what they didn't want, what they expressly said they didn't want, which is an old white guy who they were worried about might not be competent to do the job. This is Democrats I'm talking about. So I think what Harris is doing is, she's not Joe Biden. That's a huge advantage. She is 59 years old. She's a woman of color. She is way more vibrant on the campaign trail than Biden was. So I think the Democratic base is now saying, oh, okay, we're now cool with this. The question I have, and I don't think we know the answer to yet, is we're talking about a sliver of voters who are going to decide this election. You and I have talked about this many times.
A sliver of independent voters. Right. Okay, so the media at all, right? And I think we can all agree that a lot of the coverage of Kamala Harris is now looking much more like Kamala Harris's campaign press releases than it is looking...
Very laudatory.
Yes. Than it is looking, shall we say, like strict journalistic coverage, critical thinking, critical examination. Is the media responding to what its viewers and readers and listeners are feeling, or is this simply finally something that they can be excited about to stop Donald Trump?
Okay, I have two answers, both of which I think are honest. One, the media is a business. We sometimes forget about it, but it is a business whose goal is to make money. And when someone is hot and people are tuning in and the ratings are high or the clicks are high, they run with it. It's how we got Donald Trump in 2016, at least in part. Second, though, and I think this is true too, the most important, they teach you this in journalism school, even though I didn't go to journalism school. I know they teach it. The most important part of news is those first three letters, N-E-W, new. And Kamala Harris is new. What we had was this deadlock between two people that a majority of the country did not want to be president, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Now we have a different person kind of entering into the stage. And I think the interest in her, both from the media and from other folks, people are like, I don't really know that much about her, I want to learn more about her, is actually legitimate. But I think both of those things are true. Media is a business, and new news drives coverage.
Well, and I think it'd be fair to say there are a lot of people in the media who are quite excited about the idea of someone who can beat Donald Trump. Trump now is doing, at least partly today, what everyone has said he needs to do, which is return to the issues, namely the economy. Here he is talking about energy prices.
I'm announcing today that under my leadership, the United States will commit to the ambitious goal of slashing energy and electricity prices by half, at least half.
The three things that we're told mattered in this election was the economy, immigration, the border, and crime. Kamala Harris was part of the Biden-Harris administration, the number two person, who was leading when all of these problems became problems. Yet somehow the electorate has disassociated Kamala Harris from Joe Biden and the Harris legacy. We understand she's going to try to push herself farther away over the coming weeks. Do the issues not matter anymore?
I'm not sure the issues were ever central to how people make up their mind about a president of the United States. I think it is always a personality contest first. That doesn't mean there aren't voters on both sides who are single-issue policy voters, whether that's the environment or energy or abortion or gay marriage. There are those people.
This is the who you'd rather have a beer with test.
Totally. In the middle, remember, these are people who don't pay a ton of attention to elections.
Yeah, they pay attention to how they feel. They pay attention to their pocketbook.
And they pay attention to I hate to use this word because it's so popular, but the vibes. They pay attention to sort of who do they think could do a good job and understands them, right? And that's a very hard thing to quantify. There's not a number that you point to that says, Leland identifies with person X 82% and Chris identifies 72%. There's not a thing like that.
Cares about people like me.
It's feels.
Okay.
And I do think that right now, that's driving the coverage. The only thing I will say, it's August 14th. It's not October 14th. If it was October 14th and I was Donald Trump, I'd be very worried. Right now, yes, Harris is riding high, but there is still a significant, 80 plus days before people actually vote. And I think there is time to litigate that. Now, whether Donald Trump can effectively do so, can he stay on message? That's all. We could do an hour on that.
Okay. Polling average, you pointed this out in your newsletter. I think it's worth talking about. Yep. Harris right now, 46-43. Biden led at the same time in 2020 by 9 points.
Yeah.
We forget that.
Yep.
Clinton led by 9 points and lost at this time in 2016. That would lead us to believe over and over again that is said that polls can be wrong.
Yeah. And I would say, honestly, what's the commonality between 2016 and 2020? The commonality is polls underestimated Donald Trump's appeal, right? In 2020, he almost won, right? He lost, but he almost won. And in 2016, he did win, even though polling suggested he would lose nationally. I don't have any reason to believe that's changed in any fundamental way.
So if we look at the swing state polling, right?
Yeah.
We'll go through it real quick. Arizona, Harris now up 2, Georgia tied, Michigan, Harris +3, Nevada, Trump up, North Carolina, Harris up 1, unbelievable. Pennsylvania, Harris up 1, Wisconsin, Harris up 3. It was thought in 2016, maybe not as much 2020, that there were, to explain why there was an undercount of Donald Trump's votes, there were a lot of people who didn't want to admit that they were supporting him. Is that going on once again today?
Again, I'm going to assume it is until I'm proven otherwise. It was true in 2016. I do think it was still true in 2020. There are people who don't. Think about how a pollster works for people to know. Someone calls you up on the phone, you don't know them, and they say, are you supporting Donald Trump or not? Your tendency may not be to say, definitely yes, right? So I would say in 2016, polls undervalued where Trump was. In 2020, they again undervalued it. Again, I know he lost, but he came a lot closer to winning than a 9-point margin for Joe Biden would have suggested. And so I don't have any reason to believe that's different in 2024. That's why if I'm the Harris campaign, look, you'd rather be +1. I'm going to screw this up. +1 in Pennsylvania and +1 in Arizona and +1 in North Carolina than down 1.
You'd always rather be up than down.
But it's 1.
Last question. I'll give you the last 30 seconds on this. We started this intro out by saying that Kamala Harris is delivering something that people want. And it's not on the issues because where she is on the record on policy is totally in a different place than the electorate is. Is she delivering on an emotion that people need fulfilled right now?
I think the answer to that is TBD, but yes, right now.
If she wins, we're going to write a lot of books on that.
Because I think, look, the contrast is very stark. If you listen to any Donald Trump interview, speech, anything, it's the country is in massive decline. The American dream is dead. We're going to have World War III. We're going to have a Great Recession if I don't win. Great Depression if I don't win, right? Kamala Harris is, things are pretty good. We're going to continue in the right direction. We have reason to be happy. Joy keeps coming up. There's a stark contrast there. And at least at the moment, I think at the moment is the key. The joy message is beating out the kind of somber, things are bad and going to get worse unless I win message.
Well, and important to note, the big difference between the Harris campaign and the Biden campaign was flipping from threat to democracy to freedom.
Absolutely. There's no more threat to democracy talk.
That is somehow that is magically ended.
Threat is over.
Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
All right, Kamala Harris is on the longest honeymoon in political history. It's unbelievable. Her running mate is not. The danger of Tim Walz wanting to take over your kids' education. And how America's capital, with all the money in the world, ended up as America's worst place to live. It's true. I live here. Trust me.
The vice president, this guy's a clown. He was so bad. When Minneapolis was burning down, he didn't want to call in the National Guard. I got him on the phone. You got to get the National Guard. Get it. I'm telling you, if I didn't force it upon him, you might not have the city.
Donald Trump attacking vice presidential pick Tim Walz For the first week, he was the golden child of politics, a progressive former teacher turned governor who wears camo and hunts. Even the New York Times now is questioning his response to the George Floyd riots that included 2 days of unchecked looting and rioting while Walz waited to send in the National Guard. Now Team Harris wants to rebrand him as an education czar of some type from Politico. The Democratic vice presidential candidate aims to sell a liberal care economy message: free school meals, boosted education funding, paid family leave, and affordable child care as an antidote to the negative politics of gender identity and race. Mark Lotter here, former special assistant to the president, press secretary for Vice President Mike Pence. Lori Watkins, Democratic strategist, former Obama policy advisor. The one part about the new desk makes it really hard to shake hands and welcome people, but, fist bumps. Lori, to you, this was a governor, I think fair to say, was on the wrong side in terms of public opinion of masking kids, shutting down schools, the teachers' unions, vaccine mandates. Is there a danger, I should say, in putting him out as the person in the administration to talk about kids' education?
Thank you for having me on your show. Absolutely not. Standing up for kids, saying that they deserve to go to school and not be hungry and be fed, especially during a pandemic when schools are closed, and that was how the majority of these kids were being fed. I thought that was a bold move, one that might not have been popular with the overall electorate, but it definitely was for his state because he was reelected. The way that he handled the George Floyd situation, the way that he deployed the National Guard, the way that he stood up and made that case federal versus state, I think that those are all points that he took action on.
The New York Times may not agree. The New York Times may not agree with you on the George Floyd riots. I think it's interesting where you're seeing it. Mark, this is interesting though, and I had to read this a couple times and picked up on it. An anecdote to the negative politics of gender identity and race. Is this where the happy warrior message for Democrats is winning independents?
I don't think so. I mean, they're trying to define her and they're trying to define him, and they can't do it on their record. They can't do it on their policies because they're wholly unpopular, to the point that all the things that Kamala Harris said in 2019, she's now trying to walk away from. And so naming her vice president the czar of anything is really a unique idea, since she doesn't want to be known as the border czar, which she was.
Well, elections are about the future, my friend.
Elections are about the future, and if you want lower prices, a secured border, that's Kamala Harris is not the way to go.
Okay, I get the point, but in terms of what they're talking about, Lori, we keep seeing with Tim Walz things coming up. We brought this up yesterday. More information now about an imam, Azad Zaman, who was, shall we say, a Hitler enthusiast, a Hamas apologist, who Walz said this about back in 2018. Take a listen.
I would like to, first of all, say thank you to Imam. I am a teacher, so when I see a master teacher, I know it. And over the time we've spent together, one of the things I've had the privilege of is seeing the things in life through the eye of a master teacher, to try and get the understanding, listening today to the stories and what it means.
Another one of the things missed in the vet.
I wouldn't say that was missed in the vet. If you want to talk about vetting, we should talk about J.D. Vance, the vice president.
No, I actually like to talk about the topics we bring up. That's why we do it. Go ahead.
Yes. I think many of us sitting around this table have been in situations with people that later on they went to do something that...
He had done it before, by the way.
Okay.
Well, the post was in 2015 and 2016, but go ahead.
Well, I will say that he's come out and said that he wishes that he wouldn't have done that. Let's move forward. But again, we can talk about so many gaffes on the other side. And individuals that we can talk about former President Trump saying are very nice people and very good people and don't deserve to go to prison, et cetera, that have committed crimes and been convicted of crimes. So we can go there as well.
I've never been a big fan of the whataboutism defense, because I think it always saying that we are just all the same rather than one side saying that we should be better than the others. But I think this brings up an interesting point. Where, Mark, does the defining Tim Walz, defining Kamala Harris attempt by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance go? You've had a month-long rollout for her, 2 weeks for him. You now have a one-week infomercial for the DNC. Nothing has stuck on these people. None of the attacks landed by Republicans have stuck. You only have a week left?
No, I mean, I think obviously you saw that Trump-aligned PACs and the campaigns are about ready to drop $100 million on them in the swing states. And I think that's where the defining moment will start to come. We knew this honeymoon period was going to go. It's eventually the bubble's going to burst. I mean, she can't even do an interview or tell you what any of her policies are because she doesn't have any yet. But what I think this shows, the Tim Walz selection. I mean, this is her first pick. This is her first decision as a presidential nominee. And she basically gets a guy who has embellished his military service, who's obviously a radical, liberal, leftist, wacko governor. He's now hanging out with Muslims, pro-Nazi and pro-Hamas, anti-Israel types. That's her first selection. That shows you who she is. That shows you her type of leadership and where she's going to go if she's elected president. And that should scare every American.
So far, it hasn't in the polls. Good to see you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you. As if there was a TV man over here who realized where we were going in the next segment. No interviews, no press conferences, and it so far has not been a problem. Why the fawning press coverage of Kamala Harris might come back, not to bite her, but the media.
Kamala Harris is just one big old blind date. And everybody's making her whatever they need her to be. She's so good looking. She's so smart. She's so wealthy. She's so funny. She's close to her mom. She goes on really cool vacations. She'll never break your heart.
It's been 24 days, that is 576 some odd hours, since Kamala Harris accepted her position as the de facto Democratic nominee. And yet she still hasn't had a single meaningful interaction with the press. In fact, there are reports that she ditched her press pool that follows her. Her team, who are doing interviews, will tell you it's because she's just simply too busy crisscrossing the country, meeting voters. Quick check of her schedule shows it's been completely clear for a couple of days now. Here's Donald Trump's take on where she has been, or rather hasn't.
She refuses to do any interviews or press conferences. Almost 30 days now. She hasn't done an interview. You know why she hasn't done an interview? Because she's not smart. She's not intelligent. And we've gone through enough of that with this guy, Crooked Joe. He didn't do interviews either.
You think about it, Colby Hall, who's here, founding editor of Mediaite and NewsNation contributor, the political death of Joe Biden was that he hadn't been doing interviews because of how poorly he performed in them. Nor did he do press conferences because of how poorly he performed in them. And I'm wondering if Kamala Harris isn't sort of digging herself the same grave by setting what will be the expectations for the interviews, the debate, or the press conference so high.
Well, I think that's an astute point. I think there are three things going on here. Briefly, Kamala Harris is getting a pass. And it's, not just the media, the electorate, judging by the polls, also don't seem to care that much that she's not yet doing these interviews. Secondly, the campaign, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why do they want to borrow trouble by putting her in a place where she could have a gaffe or have the word salad? And then finally, I think it reveals a real concern with the Harris campaign that she may word salad it, that she may have a gaffe. And therein lies your point, that there could be this self-fulfilling prophecy, that the narrative that's surrounding this preventive approach is starting to paint her as someone that can't take the interviews because she'll make a mistake. And then when we watch the interview, we will be looking for something that we didn't look for previously.
Right. Or if somebody's been through the paces of Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and been on the trail for 20 months, as most presidential candidates in her position would be, and the campaign's doing what they're supposed to do, which is putting their candidate in the best position to win. Having her off script has never worked out well, so you don't have her off script. You say the voters don't care, and that's sort of the argument you hear, right, from her supporters. Well, the voters don't care. The media should stop being so self-important, which would be interesting when you think about the egos of the people in the media. That said, do the voters not care because the media, who they listen to, don't care either?
Well, when I say the voters don't care, I mean that the polls are kind of trending with her momentum at the time. I do think that sort of it's still early, and post DNC, this will become an issue that the voters will care about. And to your point, absolutely. I think, there's a spectrum of media outlets that cover political media, And one end of the spectrum doesn't really care, and those are largely sort of broadcasting to people who are very forgiving for Democratic candidates. So again, I've said this before, I'm surprised that it hasn't become a bigger issue. And when she does do an interview, we'll see where she goes, will be revealing. I still think it'll be a 60 minutes thing that'll be live to tape and it'll be edited.
60, and biographical and happy. And of course, the same media that's covering Kamala Harris, the same reporters are the people who told us that Joe Biden was just fine and doing calculus and cartwheels in order to protect him and to protect their access to the White House. We're always told that the media is never good enough or well organized enough for a conspiracy to protect somebody, and there's biases, but the media is in it to make money. Then you learn from the New York Times, of all people, for their reporting, Dana Walden, top ABC executive with a personal connection to Kamala Harris. The candidate is a longtime friend of Dana Walden, senior Disney executive whose portfolio includes ABC News, the host of the next debate. ABC says she does not weigh in on editorial decisions. Isn't there something more about this, that it's not that there is necessarily explicit orders, but that the very sort of elite part of the American media are the same people who like hanging out in the Hamptons and like getting invited to the parties of all the Democratic donors, who also like hanging out with all of the Democratic politicians?
I mean, absolutely. Like Dana Walden, who oversees, ABC TV, which includes ABC News, which has been a mess of late, and there's no president of ABC News right now, which makes that issue larger. She introduced Kamala Harris to her husband, and who's an entertainment lawyer. And Kamala has a home in Brentwood, California, and she's very close to Dana Walden. I don't think Dana Walden is going to be sort of leaking questions for a debate. I do think that the appearance of this is enough to raise serious questions, and I am shocked that the former president hasn't used this. He loves to lace into the fake news media and ABC and all this stuff. George Slopanopoulos, he loves to say. But this is like sort of like at football, like on a tee. That's like, why aren't you going after this one? I'm sort of shocked that Trump hasn't chased this, because if the New York Times is reporting it and you and I are talking about it, it's a legitimate story.
Well, and you could also imagine those who are moderating the ABC News debate thinking to themselves, look, my boss, the person who negotiates my contract, if I cut the legs off of her best friend, that may not work out well for me. It's not necessarily leaking questions. All right, Colby, always good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leland.
All right. The closest you will ever get to a Democratic utopia is Washington, D.C. We're here. I live here. I know this. As our good friend George Will has said, the District of Columbia, is 71 square miles surrounded by reality. And as we look across the National Mall on a gorgeous Wednesday evening, it is hard to imagine what the district has become. A new study that combines polling information with census data shows D.C. as the least desirable place in America to live. Fact check, as someone who lives here, true. Real socialism, of course, has never been tried in the United States, but Washington, D.C. is about as close to a socialist experiment as we will ever get. Democrats have been in charge, unchecked, in D.C. since time began. And thanks to the federal government, they spend as much money as they want on every progressive program as they want and have one of the highest tax rates in the country. Many of the progressive policies we hear from Harris and Democrats already exist here in the district. The mayor increased food stamp benefits, provided immigrant housing in COVID-19 quarantine hotels, and renamed an area in front of the White House Black Lives Matter Plaza. In the past 3 years, robbery is up 73%, homicide up 38%, total crime 22%. That is of the crimes that are reported. There's a lot of other reasons to dislike living here. The high taxes are just one of them. To be fair, D.C. hasn't yet reached the problem with socialism as identified by the late, great Margaret Thatcher.
Socialist governments traditionally do make a financial mess. They always run out of other people's money.
So thanks to all of you, the taxpayers who do not live in D.C., who live in reality, the city will never actually run out of other people's money. We'll keep taking it from you. So the socialism experiment here in D.C. will continue, much like the old Soviet Union, where beatings continued until morale improved. Iran keeps saying they will attack Israel, but they are not. We'll show you why they are holding off to help Kamala Harris. National Convention, 2 a.m. in Gaza. The leader of Hamas says he won't participate in ceasefire talks tomorrow in Qatar. That might be the last train in the station before the DNC, where Democrats would love a ceasefire. It's also 2 a.m. in Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin is redirecting troops in a last-ditch effort to hold off an Ukrainian counter-offensive. So Ukraine now controls 386 square miles in the northeast part of their country. It is not a big deal. It's about the size of New York City. It is an enormous issue when it comes to Russia's feeling of invincibility. We're going to switch the view here and show you the other map just so you get a sense of exactly where this is and how significant it is. This is the first time the Ukrainians have ever occupied land inside Russia, and Vladimir Putin is rightfully terrified. This is what it looked like in March. You can see the red. That's where Russia controlled Ukraine. Now we look over here. The Russians have been pushed back significantly, and now there are Ukrainians inside of Russia. That's huge. Brand new video shows Ukrainian special forces troops storming the Russian border, capturing Russian troops. Russia just announced a regional emergency for nearby Belgrade as Ukrainian troops advance further. But Putin isn't doing anything about it. It's embarrassed him greatly. It's totally changed the narrative inside of Russia, but he's not threatening to use nuclear weapons or any of the other blustery language of the past 3 years. Normally news, right, is when things happen. But it's also news when things do not happen that should, or that people are threatening. Iran's Ayatollah keeps talking about attacking Israel, but it is not. The United States keeps sending more and more ships to provide Israel with an air defense system. And you can see here, the Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group there, another amphibious ready group, and then an additional aircraft carrier is headed into the Mediterranean, all to protect Israel from a strike on Iran, a promised strike. But so far, Iran is holding back. It's a remarkable moment. To help us understand why, Ambassador John Bolton is here, National Security Advisor under President Trump, also former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Mr. Ambassador, my theory would be that Iran likes having Joe Biden and would like Kamala Harris very much to be president, and they don't want to be striking Israel in the middle of the DNC. How'd I do?
Well, I don't think our domestic politics are that interesting to them. I think Iran has a pretty tough decision to make, which could explain the delay. They were humiliated when Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, one of the key leaders of Hamas. Israel hasn't taken credit for it, but there's nobody in the world who doesn't think they did it. They killed this guy in a secure compound in Tehran with a bomb apparently planted 2 months before. And that's really a signal to everybody in Iran, including the supreme leader, that no one is safe. And not only is no one in Iran safe, but Iran's terror surrogates around the region know that they're not safe either. So to maintain its credibility, I think Iran really has to do something serious. But if they do, then they have to worry that Bibi Netanyahu, who was restrained by the Biden administration after Iran attacked some months ago with 320 drones and missiles. This time, Bibi's not going to tolerate the pressure. He's going to do what he wants to do, which could be a severe blow against Iran, perhaps against its nuclear weapons program. And I think figuring that out, figuring what Hezbollah's role might be in this response, with a government inside Iran that's got some serious internal difficulties, I think you put all that together, and that could mean delay.
You say that the domestic policy considerations, domestic politics of the United States isn't that interesting to Iran. How interesting is it to Israel that you've got Benjamin Netanyahu, who clearly has, shall we say, to lightly put it, disagreements with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, had a breakup of sorts with Donald Trump, and now is in this window before the U.S. election?
Well, I think, again, I would say they're certainly aware of it. There's no doubt about it. But I think Netanyahu's probably, if he's got domestic politics on his mind, it's Israeli domestic politics. And I think he's got his own challenges in decision making. Hezbollah, by public accounts, has over 120,000 missiles in its arsenal. 120,000. And if you put enough missiles in the air, you can overwhelm any air defense system, including the excellent one that Israel has, augmented by U.S. and perhaps other allies. So Hezbollah is a real threat, and Iran is a real threat. We don't know when missiles start being launched in Iran aimed toward Israel if one of them might not have a nuclear weapon under the nose cone, and neither does Israel. So the stakes are very high here for everyone, but I think Netanyahu, if there's a strike from Iran this time that's at all significant, I don't think anybody in the United States is going to restrain him from a really significant retaliation inside Iran, which is a good thing. And what that means when you put all that together, Israeli thinking and Iranian thinking, is more than anything else, Iran fears Israel and Bibi Netanyahu. They do not fear Joe Biden and the United States.
I was say, you're making the point, right, that the United States is almost becoming irrelevant in this calculus in one way or another. And then we go ... the Ukrainians invading Russia for the first time without giving the United States a heads up.
Well, I think they think we've lost the bubble on Ukraine, and they're going to try and take advantage of what they clearly saw was a weakness in Russia's defenses. Ukraine did this before. There were periods right after the initial Russian invasion when Russia had taken significant territory along its border in northeast Ukraine. And at one point, the Ukrainians looked at it very carefully and saw that the Russians just weren't prepared. They had diverted troops away, and they launched a surprise attack and essentially cleaned up all the Russian positions in that part of Ukraine. Now they've seen another weakness. They've exploited it. I think it's a huge political hit against Putin, but I do think the Ukrainians have to be careful. I don't think the absence of news about Russia's doing means they're not doing anything. I think if they have any sense, they're going to try and lull the Ukrainians into some false sense of confidence and then try and hit them. And that would turn a big political win for Ukraine into a significant political and possibly military loss.
All right. And then we see if Kamala Harris mentions Ukraine at the DNC, what Joe Biden says about it as well. Mr. Ambassador, it's good to see you as always, sir. Thank you.
Glad to be with you.
Yes, sir. Inflation is down. The market is up. Will that send Republicans' best argument for a second Trump term up in smoke?
Yes. I told you we're going to have a soft landing. We're going to have a soft landing. My policies are working. Start writing that way, okay?
President Biden today living his lame duck status to the fullest, telling the assembled press corps what they should print about the economy. And to be fair, inflation is down, prices are still up, but they aren't rising as fast. Give that another 90 days to bake in, plus some rosy promises by Kamala Harris, and Republicans may not want to talk about the economy anymore.
And it is my promise to everyone here, when I am president, we will continue our fight for working families of America. Including to raise the minimum wage and eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
Our buddy Mitch Rochelle is here, visiting research fellow at the University of San Diego School of Business, founding partner at Macro Trends Advisors. Mitch, let's talk about the way things are rather than the way things Republicans would like to paint them as. In reality, you think about the trajectory of things in terms of the economy, it's going in the direction that Democrats would like.
Oh, certainly, Leland. I mean, the headline is good that the pace of inflation is slowing. That's terrific. What's not happening, though, is prices aren't coming down. And that's what people sort of don't get about inflation when they talk about it politically. When you look at the items of inflation that are still sticky and stubborn, auto insurance is up nearly 20%. Rent is up over 5%. Housing in general is up close to 5%. Used car prices are down, but the problem is day to day, the kitchen table issue hasn't gone away. The challenge for politicians is the headlines tell a different story.
Right, but we're always told to believe that voters vote not on the headlines, but how they feel personally, right, in these situations. And you look at the polling, and white working class men that drove the Trump revolution in 2016, that over the past couple of years have gotten crushed by high prices that are still high, are now moving towards Kamala Harris. Take a listen.
White working class voters, white voters without a college degree. That is Donald Trump's core group. That was the reason why he was able to break down that giant blue wall, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, in the Great Lakes. And look at their support now versus where we were a few months ago when the matchup was between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Look, Donald Trump still leads, but look at that margin. It has shrunk significantly. It was
I get why you want to talk about prices still being high, and it's very rare that prices actually come down. But there's something that voters are thinking about other than that prices are high.
Yeah, no, clearly. I think, oftentimes you find voters looking for change, and they didn't like Biden, clearly. They've seen Trump before, so maybe they'll roll the dice economically with Kamala Harris, because maybe to them things aren't so bad. But the one thing to remember about the economy, and I'll pivot to the Fed for a second, the Fed has two jobs. Mitch,
guess what? We only have 20 seconds. We don't have time for the Fed. I won't.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. It's good to see you, my friend. Tomorrow, dueling events. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden together, talking about the Biden-Harris legacy, which will be quite interesting, because how does Kamala Harris move on from the Biden legacy when she is standing right next to him? That's tomorrow.